Thank you, Shannon. I'm just going to go down the list here on my computer. Julie, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Julie Gelsing. I'm located in Red Deer, Alberta, and I'm a registered provisional psychologist, and Jeff is my supervisor. So that's how I was invited to join in. And I work for a nonprofit agency here in Red Deer. And I have a lot of parents and children that I'm working with, and I eventually would like to do high conflict families. And I have a few already that I'm dealing with. But I'm finding that in Red Deer, what they've done is they've pulled all of the school counselors out. So there's no support. They have what's called community liaison workers that bounce back and forth all the time between various schools. So kind of like what Shannon said, I'm wanting to work a little bit as a bridge to be able to support the families when they have these children that are acting out in school, and just to kind of learn a little bit more about it. So.
Thank you, Julie. I've been to Red Deer many times in Alberta, my favorite province. Emily, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning. I am from San Bernardino, California, so Southern California, and I work for San Bernardino City Unified School District. I am an MFT associate, but I'm also the program specialist, and so working within the school system and with this population in particular, I would like to build it into our program and into the system that we already have going. I have been a teacher and a counselor in the school system as well.
Emily, did you study at the Cal State in San Bernardino?
I did for my teaching credential and for my counseling master's, but I did my MFT master's through North Central University online.
Did you connect with John Winslade at that time?
Yes, he was our program director.
He's a good bud, yeah.
Yeah, I think he's not the director anymore, or the coordinator. I think he moved back to New Zealand, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
Wow, okay, so it's starting to feel like a small world here.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been to San Bernardino many times. Mel, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Mel, and I am also in Southern California, in the LA area, West Hollywood area, actually. And I just started with Wiser last month. I'm super excited. I'm also looking to do a practicum with the Center for Child and Family Development. And so this is why I'm attending this. I'm very interested and in the future of working with children as an LMFT.
Awesome. Well, I used to live in Southern California, and Mel and I are part of the same organization at WISER, which is the Western Institute for Social Research. Karen, could you introduce yourself?
Yes, I have been participating at WISER for about a year, a good year, in the not so long ago past, and was starting to do a doctoral program there, and phased out on a variety of grounds. And so I don't know if a doctorate is in my future or not. That is yet to be determined. I am very interested in systemic trauma, in the systemic nature of trauma across time and space, across generations, and in the interactions of how humans get also traumatized in their communities, in their families, in all the way to globally. And that is what I wanted, and I may still want to think about in a doctoral program, but for now I'm doing this just in my spare time as a psychotherapist and as a humanist chaplain. And I'm a fan of Brian's, and so when he said there is an 11 o'clock, I remembered that the same link is, I can just go to that link that I have known and hang out with you guys a little bit. Because what, you know, those catastrophic parental situations with children that blend and bleed into the school is everything that I just said, from generational trauma to individual traumatization to the traumatization not only of the parents but also then in expansion is not the right word, but you my brain is half German right now. And then for the children, and then for you guys who actually have to work this. And I had a very long conversation with my German cousin, who works in a school here, and she literally says none of her children are not literally traumatized. So, or have many signs and symptoms of very highly activated and traumatized nervous systems.
Okay.
So I thought this was interesting. I want to hang out with you.
Thank you, Karen. Veronica, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, so I'm Veronica. I'm a Master of Counseling student at Athabaska University. I learned about this webinar through Jeff Chang. Hello. And I'm in the process of finding my practicum placement starting in January. So I thought this webinar would be a really good idea to learn a little bit more, since in Vancouver, BC, which is where I'm located, it looks like there are lots of counseling practices that offer marriage and family services and couples counseling, and basically like a lot of group and multi-person oriented sort of counseling. And I really wanted to know a little bit about how, as a budding counselor, I can incorporate some of that learning into my practicum and future practice.
Great, thank you, Veronica. I'm Brian Gerard. I'm currently the Chief Academic Officer of the Western Institute for Social Research in Berkeley, California. It's a distance learning organization, which is why I'm able to live in Florida and still do this work. I used to teach at the University of San Francisco and was chair of the counseling psychology department. And I'm Canadian, originally from Manitoba, taught at UBC. And I'm very interested in this topic that Dr. Chang is going to be talking about. And unfortunately, I made an error in recording it during the Oxford Symposium. I put it on my computer, didn't have enough space, and Jeff has kindly agreed to do it again, for which we're very grateful, because we want to have the video posted so others can see it. So I'm going to introduce Jeff now. Dr. Jeff Chang is Associate Professor in the Graduate Center for Applied Psychology at Athabaska University. He is a registered psychologist in the province of Alberta, Canada, and a clinical fellow and approved supervisor in the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. A registered psychologist for 33 years, Jeff has worked in children's mental health, employee assistance programs, and private practice, and with families embroiled in high conflict, separation, and divorce. He publishes in the areas of high conflict divorce, clinical supervision, child and family therapy, and school-based counseling. Jeff's current practice focuses on high conflict divorce. He provides clinical supervision at Calgary Family Therapy Center and to provisional registered psychologists. Dr. Chang is also the editor of the Canadian School Counseling Review. And we join him now for his presentation on school-based approaches to high conflict divorce.
Okay, thanks, Brian. And thank you everybody for giving up part of your Saturday to come and hear me gab. This is something that I'm passionate about. And I'll skip over, I've got some introductory slides about myself that I'll largely skip. But I'm passionate about it because it's a systemic problem in at least North American society, and I hear that in Western Europe it is. But the context in North America, and U.S. and Canada, and in the Commonwealth countries, is that there's a common law legal system, and then people are automatically defined as adversaries. So my wife tells me I should use more current cultural references, because Kramer versus Kramer is a movie that Brian might remember and Karen might remember when it first came out. That was kind of one of Meryl Streep's breakout roles, and Meryl Streep is like 69 years old now, so that's quite an old movie about a high conflict divorce. And this is an important systemic feature of high conflict parenting. Now there's movement within the system that are promising developments for alternate dispute resolution, and things are happening in various jurisdictions like triage, mediation, parenting coordination. I can talk a bit about those maybe, but this is a brief presentation. So those are all terms that one can look up, but it has made an impact, but things are still systemic. This is the layers of systemic interaction in high conflict divorce is it's kind of wild. There's lots of things going on. This is a quote. We have in Alberta some folks who are trying to do this initiative called Reforming the Family Justice System, and this is a really great definition. This is a government effort. I think it's kind of petering out, unfortunately, because of our new government, newish government, our newish conservative government, let me say. But it's a partnership of the Alberta Ministry of Justice, the Alberta Court of Queen's Bench, which is the court in which you must get divorced, and the Law Society of Alberta. They're trying to talk about reforms and meet every couple of months, and I've been had the benefit of being invited to sit with this thing. Family justice issues are primarily social and relationship problems that contain a legal element. But what's really interesting is the legal element often takes over. The system drives a lot of what goes on. Oh, sorry, my slide, I'm not scrolling my slide properly. So there's lots of intervention as well. There's educational, dispute resolution, and some intervention types of programs. One of the interventions that I want to, that NWFF is New Ways for Families, and full disclosure, I'm funded to do a research study on New Ways for Families, which is, in short, a psychoeducational counseling program, early intervention when people are first separating to prevent high conflict co-parenting. But those of you who have some experience, or those of you who have worked in schools, there's going to be some, if I put this slide up, what experiences have you had with post-conflict divorcing parents and families? You know, if I'm doing a half-day or one-day workshop, we usually have 20 minutes of discussion about it. And I'm concerned that just putting this slide up, those of you who have been working as therapists or working as school counselors or teachers or whatever for a while, this created a visceral response in you, because some of these families are like, oh, right, like these are the people that want us to make us want to hide in our offices, or if you know you're going to see somebody like that, you know, you don't want to get out of bed, you want to put the covers over your head and just avoid situations like that, just because they're emotionally draining, but also they're professionally risky in terms of complaints. So here's the quick and dirty overview. This is a fairly rare phenomenon, but it takes up a lot of space in our therapy practices that we work with kids and in our schools. 75% of divorces go through no problem, tickety-boo. Maybe the parents don't like each other very much, but they manage. 10 to 15% go to court once and it's contested, right? Everything that happens in the North American courts anyways, if they agree, you know, it gets sort of endorsed by a court order. But sometimes if you go and you're not in agreement, then a judge makes a decision. So that's a contested application, 10 to 15%. And then 5 to 15% can be described as high conflict relationships. And sometimes these are defined in terms of the amount of time, the number of times they go to court. They go to court repeatedly, and they litigate about things that many of us would consider trivial. So emotional reactivity, blamefulness, if some, you know, minor slip up, 5 minutes late picking up a child, You are irresponsible. You've always been like this, right? You're a terrible parent because they were 5 minutes late picking up their child. Exaggeration of parenting differences. My poster child family for this is the mom who is, think about the most fitness-oriented person that you know, and this person is probably more fitness and health-oriented than that, versus the dad who, she's a healthcare professional, versus the dad who's a techie and who thinks a great thing to do on a Friday night with his boys is get a two-liter bottle of Coke and a couple of massive pizzas and sit around and either watch movies or play video games. These are both fine parents, better than adequate, I would say excellent parents. But these parenting differences mean he sees her as rigid and controlling, and she sees him as irresponsible and not attending to the children's health. So exaggeration of parenting differences. Sometimes it goes to court where they say, you should not have, Your Honor, you should not have, the other party should not have supervised access. You should not have unsupervised access. The other party should not have overnights. And court applications about issues that some people would say are trivial. Vacations, I'll just scroll back. Vacations, extracurricular activities. I had one family who lived in adjacent communities very close to one another, but they couldn't agree on a soccer league. So one week the child was in soccer at one soccer league, and the other week the child was in soccer at another soccer. Crazy, right? Vacations. Can I have an extra day? I've got much, I can book plane flights that are less expensive if I leave a day earlier. Can I do this on a day of your parent time? No. So these kind of things are rampant. And sometimes I think about this, 4 levels of problem. So they come in, and often families who are in this, whether you're a school counselor, whether you're a school-based MFT, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a therapist in private practice, often they'll come in, a parent will come in and plead their case, they treat you a bit like a judge. They plead their case to you, which means saying what's wrong with the other parent. And they say a variety of different kinds of things, right? But they all seem to have one sort of speed, emotional intensity, 100 miles an hour, right? So there are some serious concerns, right? Sometimes people come in and say, the other parent does this, this, and this, and you think, I need to call child protection authorities. If this is, I don't know if this is true or not, but I need to call. There's sometimes they talk about inadequate parenting. Kids aren't getting fed on a decent schedule. He doesn't feed them dinner till 9 p.m. and the kids are, 7 and 5. There's no schedule. There's no bedtime. Kids are getting yelled at or getting a swat on the butt. Now, I wouldn't send my child if I had a similar age child over there for a sleepover or a play date, but those probably are not within child protection purview, or maybe borderline. Big disagreements about generally adequate parenting. The former couple that I mentioned before, super health conscious versus 2 liters of Coke and massive pizza. And problems that arise simply because parents don't communicate well. So they're both perfectly fine parents, but they can't talk to each other. And so kids get picked up a few minutes late, or something doesn't get taken to the other person's house, or if the child is a bit forgetful, it's a big deal. And there's tricky entry points, right? So when people first separate, this is one of those things you want to watch. Those of you who work in schools, sometimes there's new court applications. So there's a separation that's, everybody's getting settled into their new environment, or not having certain people in the house. That's highly volatile. Then somebody commences a formal divorce application, okay? Referrals for counseling services are sometimes tricky because you may think that parents could agree upon the fact that, look, we're separating and our child should go to therapy. Yep, okay, sure, right? But many times that's met with suspicion because you're just trying to get the therapist to say that I shouldn't have equal parenting time or that I should only have every second weekend. So referrals for counseling services are met with suspicion. Those of you who worked in schools or have worked in schools, right, you have an ongoing involvement with the family. And the other thing is school is teachers, principals, vice principals, school counselors, school-based therapists, teachers, and also the cleaning, the janitorial and maintenance staff, the school secretaries. Schools get traumatized by these families. Karen, thank you for mentioning that trauma is such universal or near universal experience. And the people in the schools get traumatized. The poor school secretary who's staffing the front office, and then a parent comes in to give her or him a piece of their mind, and you're not like, and they see these kids in a non kind of directive, helpful, trying to be helpful, and they're not people who generally have to tell children what to do or manage their behavior, and they really take it to heart. School secretaries are there because they love kids. They like being around kids all the time. But that's a tough one, right? And schools cannot fire the child, right? Other battlegrounds, what school should they go to? Medical appointments, extracurricular activities, vacations and holidays, anything that they can disagree about. Oops, sorry, I put that slide in twice. And then tricky issues for schools are access to information. Field trips. You never told me that he has a field trip on my parenting time. Well, you idiot, you can look on the school website. I'm not getting a copy of the report card. So who gets to volunteer at school? Pickups, bus stops. Why can't mutual blame for incomplete tasks? He never makes sure they have their homework done. No, I think if those of you who have worked in schools or are working in schools, hopefully I'm not, maybe we need to do some EMDR with you right now, because hopefully I'm not, by mentioning these things, I may be reminding you of families that you have dealt with or currently are dealing with, right? And then sometimes there are some parents who are like objectively, truthfully, like there's one parent who does everything, shows up at the school, make sure that they write in their agenda. I don't know if you have this practice where you live, but lots of school districts here buy an agenda, which is a schedule and notes home to the parents, a paper document that goes, a little booklet that goes home back and forth with the child. So the one parent writes in the agenda, the other parent never does. One parent seldom does homework or the home reading, and the other parent is just very fastidious about that, right? So a general disparity. Now, this is an email. The only thing I've changed are the names. Mom has written to dad and said, "What? Want to get some camping gear for the boys' trip? Have you got it? I've not seen what you are looking for. I believe Jason's camping trip has been known for quite some time, and it is. This was email, but I'm adding. I'm taking some dramatic license here. It is unfortunate that you have not organized his equipment before now. A lot on your plate, et cetera, et cetera. Unfortunately, for our son, is that he had no shoes for the first hour and a half of his football clinic, and he had to participate in his socks. Please advise, I put in parentheses, you incompetent so-and-so, right? I'm not going to use any swear words today. Please advise if you would like me to have standby items you can't locate. Mom writes back, yes, we all had a fantastic and memorable weekend, etc. By the way, a friend had Jason's shoes and forgot to bring them, but I will be sure to show him this email so I can pass, pass along, the picture covers up. Pass your criticism along to him, right? And so this kind of back and forth, I think it's long overdue for you to get a job and contribute to supporting your children. Just to say this guy he had a job. Our oil industry was quite stricken then, still quite stricken. And he's a guy he's a geologist who has a MBA degree, and consulting business was a bit slow, right? Anyways, you're a deadbeat dad. So this is the kind of thing that this kind of communication, those of you who are working in schools, hopefully maybe, you know, you're not cringing and it's not bringing up traumatic, you know, repressed traumatic memories for you. So this is just to say children have lots of difficulties. Children in high conflict divorces are way more likely than children whose parents don't divorce or whose parents divorce without high conflict to have all kinds of problems. And I don't need to get into the details of that. Those of you who have seen them, it's going to be obvious. And the other thing is, for us, you work in a school or you're a family therapist or you're a psychologist, we get invited in to pathologize. It's like a parent will say, you know, I was online and I found this article about borderline personality disorder, and I think that's what my ex-wife is. This work scares off lots of us too. Schools, you can't avoid it. You have to work with these folks. Some community or private practice therapists, like some community agencies, don't come to us if you're in a high conflict divorce. We won't see you. Private practitioners will fire the child because they can't manage the parent's conflict, but schools don't have the luxury of firing kids. And here in Alberta, we have some kindergarten to grade 9 schools, so that means you've got a child for 10 years in your school if the family doesn't move. Schools don't have the luxury. So then it traumatizes us, right? It's just difficult, and it traumatizes teaching staff, administrative staff, mental health staff, and teachers, and the secretaries. There's some stats about how much people get complained against, psychologists or other kinds of therapists get complained against in high conflict divorce situations. I've been geeking enough to read annual reports of various regulatory boards in Canada to find this out, and I won't get into the exact numbers, but it's hugely, I reckon it's 100 to 1,000 times disproportionate relative to the amount of services, the aggregate number of services that are provided by practitioners. So what do we do, right? We're systemic thinkers. Those of you who are studying MFT, or if you're just embarking on your career, you're interested in working with families, and what do we do? Now, those of you with family therapy training, I just invite you, I'm not gonna, again, this would be another discussion item in a workshop, but just think about the systemic patterns that were happening with some of the families that you've met over the years. Or even, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name, if you're quite new to your internship, right? Just in the school, in the first few weeks, right? What kinds of systemic patterns can you think about? Try and tease that out. Okay, what should schools do? I've got kind of a half a dozen points here, and it's different. It's a little bit different. There's some of you, and I know that some of the folks like Kathy Londy, who's often a part of this group, have done a lot to promote school-based family therapy. And it's a little bit different than people who work in schools and don't have a clearly defined family therapy role. But I think that these ideas can benefit people, whatever discipline they're working from. So I got 6 or 7 points here. Focus on the big picture. Use educate, the core business of education as the entry point. Be on the same page. Within the school, be on the same page and have a go-to person. Interact purposefully, and I'm going to say carefully, with parents and step-parents. Create a safe, neutral space for the child and provide supportive and skill-based counseling for students. Now, sometimes you might be able to get families in to do, quote, family therapy with both parents. I've got another presentation on that, but that's but sometimes as a school, you just need to create the best conditions possible for the child to have a safe, neutral space and get educated. And to have the parents cooperate as much as possible or interfere as little as possible in what you're doing as a school. So it's more from that perspective. Think of what you're doing. So the first point, focus on the big picture. Think of this as a long-term issue. You may, assuming the family does not move, have this child for many years. Be patient. And then make sure that you have knowledge of the existing school policy. Sometimes it's not specific enough. Sometimes it's not going to cover the things that you need. Also think in terms of a family and larger systems assessment. Those of you who are trained in family therapy, the school, the separated or divorcing parents, the step parents, and maybe some other significant people like the soccer coach, the scout leader, the people who are outside outside of the family, the immediate family system, nuclear family. And then this is about listening. This isn't about interviewing. Understand the thinking of each parent. So your teachers and assistant principal and school secretary will be able to give the sort of the point person an understanding of what the each parent is thinking and how they conduct themselves. And think about the patterns of interaction between the schools and the parents and between a parent and the school and the other parent and the school. The core business of schools is education, and then everything that everybody else does, counselors and therapists, occupational therapists, is in the service of education. So the school has to say, we're going to do whatever we need to do to educate your child. We're happy to do whatever it takes, but we're not going to advocate for either parent's position. Sometimes parents cannot or not willing to be in the same room with parent-teacher interviews, meet the teacher night or whatever, however things are structured where you work. But make it clear that you're not there to advocate for either parent's position. With parents, there will be times when you have factual information, and I know that school personnel, the last thing they want to do is go to court. There are going to be times when there's factual information that's actually important to the court, but do that as little as possible. With parents, you're going to chair meetings assertively. It's not the time. It's not mediation. It's about communicating information and asking for their cooperation about the education of the child. And no parent is going to say, "Oh, I don't care about school." Or very few parents are going to say, "I don't care about school." Use that as the entry point. Being on the same page. Next point: being on the same page and have a go-to person. If you're a school-based family therapist, you're the ideal person to do that. Sometimes a school doesn't have that personnel in their complement, so a counselor. As Julie was saying in Red Deer, now there's no school counselors. It might be the assistant principal or the vice principal who has to be the big picture, have the go-to person. And sometimes they need a bit of support from folks like us to think about the patterns and understand the big picture. And hopefully they're around long enough to be the school's institutional memory and to coach the rest of the staff. Here in Alberta, I think we call them school resource group meetings. Lots of times these are students who have special education needs. But I think that if there's a high conflict divorcing family, usually these are brief meetings that the school has to conduct for half an hour before school starts usually, or half an hour after school ends. But the go-to person, whether it's a therapist or assistant principal or vice principal, needs to get these families on the agenda, so that you can discuss a system response. And be careful of teachers who get aligned with one parent or the other. It's tempting, right? It's important to be warmly skeptical of these kinds of claims. I have full custody. Maybe it seems like you do, because, like, you know, heterosexual couples, traditional family configurations, the mom does, you know, 80, 90%, maybe more of the medical appointments, signing kids up for sports, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes it feels like the mother does everything and feels like they have full custody, but the court order says otherwise. And then as soon as somebody does, as soon as the other parent sees something they don't like, you want to take our kid to a therapist? Or you think our kid needs to go to a special education school? There's nothing wrong with our kid. Or the parent who seems to do everything, quote, in quotes, has a new partner, or might be having a new baby, right? Those things disrupt the stability of the system. The go-to person should make sure the court orders are on file, and in-house counsel at the school board should interpret them if necessary. And also, I think most school districts should have a divorce lawyer on speed dial to really be able to interpret these things. Be really fastidious about things like privacy policies and privacy legislation. Okay, and carefully plan meetings with parents. Don't let them go south. If they can't be in the same room, don't try and make them. It's not time efficient. You think it's time efficient to meet with people together? Sometimes it's not. Support each other within the school. Don't forget the clerical staff. Be careful how you interact with parents. Focus on the academics. Listen supportively, but set boundaries. Teachers need coaching with this. You might be a parent sitting with a parent who's telling them how awful the other parent is. And teachers need to, as an assistant principal or a counselor or an MFT in the school, it's important to coach the teacher to go, I understand this is very upsetting for you. I'm not prepared to talk about that with you. And let's talk about what, you know, about how you can support Kenny's reading. Listen sometimes for when things are better, and ask about it, and ask people about, you know, why things are not worse and what they're doing. These are some, you know, maybe advanced skills in interacting with parents for a teacher. I'm influenced by solution-focused ideas. So sometimes we're in a visiting relationship, sometimes we're in a complainant relationship, sometimes we're in a customer relationship. Just be careful about asking parents to do things when you know darn well they're not going to do it. It's kind of a waste of time, and it's annoying. I have a plaque in my office here that I've had in every office since about 1981, which says, never try to teach a pig how to sing. You will waste your time and it annoys the pig. Also, be very careful in interacting with people, parents. People generally don't go near this, but don't encourage the idea that you'll go to court. And make suggestions tentatively. Base suggestions on what children say or what the parent himself says works. If you hear something that seems to be a bit better, it's okay to ask about that. Again, this is my solution-focused influence. The other thing is, be careful. PIPs are problematic, pathologizing interpersonal patterns. Keep the patterns in mind and listen for both sides of the loop, parents interacting with each other. The other thing is, coach teachers and others to not get aligned with another parent. This is basic counseling skills, but sometimes teachers need to be coached. Sometimes parents will talk about how abusive or controlling the other parent is. And it's important to not just nod and smile or to agree by saying, oh, it sounds like he's really abusive. Because that's going to end up getting to the other parents like, oh, you see, even the teacher said you're really abusive. If you're careful about your language, it's like, oh, when he does that, you perceive it as controlling. I think that makes a difference. It's a skill that sometimes people need to look at. Okay, that's where that is. And I'm just going to move through this. Working with the parental subsystem. Don't get them together unless if you think it actually is going to be a work. It's going to work. And then meetings have to have an agenda. I mean, I say this to therapists because they're more prone to try and be therapeutic. It's important to be structured and directive. You're more of a chairperson than you are a therapist or counselor in these kinds of situations. It's not a good time. It's not a good time to practice your novice counseling skills. You have to be a chairperson. Task oriented more than therapeutic. Acknowledge but don't agree. Don't let the parents speak to each other if you're in a meeting. I don't think so. I manage the session carefully. You can suggest joint projects, and but it's important that the school be a safe and neutral place. Sometimes that's the best we can do, is give the child some skills to manage an outlet. I mean, you know, maybe the one parent really is a solid, supportive, warm parent, and the other is kind of authoritarian and dismissive. You can generally tell that, and it's tough for kids when they think that, well, if I decide I don't want to be with the authoritarian parent more, they're going to freak out. If I decide I want to be the other parents more, it's going to make the other parent really, really mad. Those are difficult situations, and they're unfair situations. And we have to do our own work to be able to tolerate that and be present during those situations for the child. So maybe the best we can do is be a listening ear and help them develop appropriate assertiveness skills and appropriate anxiety management skills for the context. Assertiveness is tricky. Back in the 70s, famous behavior therapist Daniel O'Leary had assertiveness training for women who were victims of domestic violence. Guess what happened? They were physically assaulted more, okay? Sometimes assertiveness isn't the greatest thing. It's got to be done in context. Focus on the child's reports of what seems to be going better, and sometimes there's targeted interventions in our school system, at least as it was before our new government came in. You know, there were school-based services that students could be referred to. Sometimes it's not a service that's embedded just in the school. Sometimes you can refer to somewhere else. But refer to targeted interventions if needed, but keep an eye on the big picture. Because lots of community therapists don't get it. Lots of community therapists will just do their individual work with the kid. And then that's without a sense of systemic, the way the system rolls. And sometimes that does more harm than good. And that's my whirlwind tour. So there's a lot of content there. A lot of things were just, you know, skimmed the surface. I'm pleased that honored to have been invited to submit a manuscript, so I can flesh this out a bit. But questions?
Okay. I have a question. You know, school mental health professionals, depending on their training, if they're in a family therapy program, they get one course in couples counseling. And if they're not in a family therapy program related to schools, they might get something on parent consultation. And so I can sort of see that a lot of school mental health professionals might be very reluctant to take on this task and want to refer it to some outside agency, except people don't go to outside agencies. They often feel insulted when they're referred to an outside agency. And so what are your thoughts about the folks who train mental health professionals who work in schools? What is your sense of optimism about universities regarding this as important? Because I personally regard this as a very important area. I think one of the most important skills a school-based mental health counselor can have is couples counseling skills, but not everybody would agree with that.
Okay, I agree with it. I've got a whole nother stream of writing that I'm doing on. The other thing is in Canada, you know, we only have 2 co-AMFT accredited master's programs in MFT and 2 post-degree institutes for, you know, 36 million people. The state of family therapy training in counseling and clinical psychology in Canada is abysmal. It's also abysmal that many practitioners do marital therapy or family therapy without any even coursework, let alone supervised practice. So I'm actually pessimistic, and I'm trying to use the platform because as Brian said, I'm an AMFT approved supervisor and clinical fellow. So I see this stuff and I just shake my head. So I'm not optimistic about these universities in Canada. In the US, it seems to me that MFT, counseling, school counseling, and psychology are way more siloed. So even though there's MFT programs, if you're in a counseling program or a clinical psychology or counseling psychology program, it's not much better. So I'm not that optimistic. I think it's super important. And especially, the other thing though is I think that schools have an absolute responsibility because like someone's got to do it. And it's the educational experience of the child is hugely compromised if they can't be at school with and not have school at least be a little bit of a haven. And it's ugly work, so people shy away from it. I'll just give you a geeky statistic. Between 2005 and 2018, in the province of Saskatchewan, 30% of the findings of fault against psychologists with the Psychology Regulatory Board were from high conflict divorce issues. Now, it sure isn't 30% of the work that psychologists do in Saskatchewan. It's like maybe 1/10%, right? This is common. So people stay away from it. There's a competence gap because your clinical, if you're a student or an intern or a pre-licensure person, your supervisor probably has no idea how to work with high conflict divorce because their supervisor didn't, because everybody's scared of it. So it's a cascade effect of lack of competence.
Yes.
And, you know,
there was a case in San Francisco a long time ago in the 1980s that I knew of. It was a student actually in our program, and the student mistakenly sided with the mother, and the father shot and killed the wife, the daughter, himself. He wounded the son, but before he did all of this, he came to the counseling center looking for the therapist who wasn't there.
Yep.
Fortunately for the therapist. And so it's extremely dangerous to not have a balanced relationship with the parents in a situation like this.
Yeah. In Winnipeg, where you're from, Manitoba, Brian, a guy bombed his former spouse's law office, and her lawyer got badly injured and hand blown off or something like that, right? I mean, and that's not even that. I mean, okay, these are the horror stories, and many of the murder suicides, you know, not reasonable proportion of them are these kinds of issues. But let's not even think about that. Let's think about the day-to-day stress that schools go through, right? And how these families take up, there could be 2 or 3 families like this in a school, and they take up a massive amount of time and energy with teachers, administrators, school-based counselors, and like I say, secretaries, right? So, Karen, I'm just going to see if there's questions in the chat. But no, okay. Karen.
Since I had this long conversation, an impressive conversation with my cousin, who's been a teacher for 25 years here in the public school system, and learned about how stressful for a teacher the impact of parents can be, and I would go to translate what she said as the lobby of the parents at large is very, very, very powerful as it pertains to what here, as it pertains to what teachers can and are supposed to do and cannot do and all of those kind of things. So while there is, while they can do their curricular and they can do their thing, there's all of these interventions that parents try to press for. My question to you is that if there is this kind of parent influx where 2 parents, where it's not parents just want their children to have the best training in only science or, some kind of thing, pressing for something. But there are 2 parents who are fighting over the teachers, maybe over the teachers. Are you training teachers with just like a presentations like you did now? Might be very, very useful for teachers as well. This was not something that that is very, very, you didn't say, and here's is this academic proof and that. I mean, you did a little bit, but I could imagine that if my cousin might have been, this might have been available to them. A lot of it might have been familiar, but a lot of it might also have been encouraging as a teacher who's one step closer and every day.
So big picture question, getting this, like, if I could wave a magic wand, right, I would just, all schools would do this. But this is not empirically supported. I mean, this is me as a psychologist in private practice, 25 years of working with people in high conflict divorce. Then getting asked by and then my involvement with the school counseling division of our Teachers Association. Then thinking, and then getting asked, can you come and talk to us about this? So I get the occasional invitation to talk to a school about this, or talk to a group of school counselors in a district about this, or conference presentations. But of course you'll know that, I mean, that's not a really efficient way of disseminating this, right? And
yes.
And I give a presentation, and there's 10 school counselors from one school division, and then what do they do with it? Who knows, right? Do they go back and implement this? They would need, I mean, the other thing is, and I have to do this on my academic time because people can't pay for it, right? They would need hours of consultation to implement this, not just training. I mean, I've gone, I'd be tickled, and I've done this, go to staff PD days and professional development days, right? I'm tickled to do that, but to get this, I mean, I'm talking hypothetically. This is my fantasy about what schools should do. It's not empirically supported. And it's so difficult to get any research happening on this topic at all, just because it's real people who are highly vulnerable, and try and get that past your research ethics board. School boards don't want to do, I mean, like getting a research project through a school board, through school board approval is worse than getting university approval. So there's all that stuff too that's really, really tricky. So yeah, I mean, I'll talk about this to anybody, anytime.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's see if there's some questions from the other members of the group. Gabriella.
Yes, I'm sorry I joined a little bit late. Thank you so much for this presentation. I understand I joined in late, as we know, and so I wanted to ask about the differentiation in the school setting, working with students, that and the perception that counselors have and teachers and staff when dealing the perception of the conflict, whether we were differentiating between domestic violence, it's not interchangeable with high conflict, because high conflict implies that there is an equal power balance between the two parties, and then domestic violence would not be that case. So how is the perception conveyed in the implementation of counseling in these settings where high conflict is different than domestic violence?
Really good question. The other thing I would add to the premise of the question is that there's a high degree of differentiation in the domestic violence situation. That they're not all by any means equal clinically, right? So the gross, okay, so for a school, okay, so it's different if you're like a therapist in a community agency or private practice, where, you know, you're going to do your screening, and part of your due diligence is like either asking about or listening carefully for, or you know, being on the lookout for the dynamics, if you're doing couples therapy, that tell you that domestic violence is occurring or could be occurring, right? So listening carefully. So listening carefully for those cues, being on the lookout for those cues, or doing your due diligence and asking about that as part of your intake in a community counseling or private practice setting. That's one thing, right? The other thing is in a school where like, for instance, in our school systems in Alberta, some school counseling services can happen without the informed written consent of the parents, because they're considered to be part of the school's programming. Then, I mean, you take your cues from what people actually present or tell you. So if a child's coming and, you know, look, I think that school-based personnel, particularly if they're not therapists, have access to different kinds of information, right? So if a parent comes in and tells their child's teacher, yeah, like, you know, he hit me last night. Well, that's one thing that triggers from the school's response a whole set of obligations. Do we need to call Child Protective Services? Do we need to advise this mom of her of options for where she could take refuge, right? So I think the determination or questioning of whether domestic violence is happening or has happened, the school might be the initial reporter and then the initial information gatherer, but then it gets sort of bumped up to a different group of people, right? Whether the police should be called, right? And then whether it makes more sense. So it's a pretty complex question. So it sounds like I'm hedging, which I am. That I think then the other thing is that a school-based mental health person and you know, I think systemically trained people are better equipped for this. You know, has a very central and important consultative role to the school staff about that. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think it's an important determination in community-based therapy. It's an important determination in a school setting, but there's a different set of obligations and a different set of accountabilities within schools. So it's pretty complex. You know, there's going to be situations, domestic violence situations, where there's just there's a no contact order or a protective order of some kind, right? And, you know, the particular parent who's perpetrated the violence is not permitted to come to school or to see the child or to be in contact with the other parent. I mean, when those things happen, that drives, I mean, then what I've said is you know, superseded by anything that a court's directed, right? But I guess what I'm going to say is my, what I've talked about is sort of like garden variety high conflict divorce, by and large, without domestic violence. It's great that you raised that point, and it would have, yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it just adds a whole layer of complexity.
Veronica, you have a good question. Would you like to ask it?
I could. I'll just read it off of the chat here. So, Jeff, given the emotionality of high conflict divorce, I understand it's important not to take sides and essentially have a neutral stance in working with a family. So, given that I'm learning this in my family therapy course now, how might a strengths-based approach work in these situations? Would they be invalidating, healing? Yeah, it sounds like something that could even be really hard to do, especially as a new counselor like myself. Thank you.
I think, I don't know if you've heard me talk about this in the context of courses. Whether it's strength-based or resiliency-based or solution-focused or psychodynamic or whatever, models don't invalidate people. People invalidate people. It's the way they're executed. So you could, you know, whatever your theoretical orientation is as a therapist, you know, we just do good listening, right? We listen and we don't disqualify people's experiences of struggle or distress. And the other thing, though, is that because, you know, I'm influenced, as I think you know, by solution-focused ideas quite a bit. And I'm always, but solution-focused therapy, I did a whole one-day workshop yesterday on solution-focused therapy from this chair, is not about being positive. I need to emphasize that. Or strength-based approach is not about being positive. There, everything's going to be all right. Look, you're so, you know, resilient and you're so persistent in this area. Like, it's not, and it's not telling people about their strengths. It's listening for their strengths and then using your interviewing skills to expand their strengths. So, yeah, you know, I just hung in, you know, the client might say, I just hung in there and it's been so hard. To keep my cool when the other parent's being such a jerk. And I'd be much more inclined, so a strength-based or resiliency-based or solution-focused approach isn't saying, wow, that's really, you know, must take a lot of strength to bite your tongue. It's not saying, it's not naming it. It's, oh, isn't that interesting? Tell me what you did. Well, you know, he was calling me all these kinds of names, and I just said, it's going to pass. I'm going to keep my cool, and I need to be focused on the welfare of our son. And I wanted to talk back and just tell him what a jerk he is, but I didn't. Tell me more about how you did that, right? So it's not naming strengths and identifying as much. I mean, eventually you do when you kind of made a case for it in the interview. You can ask. The other thing is, it's possible to be too positive, right? In our courses at Athabaska, if you've watched videos and you've seen Insu Kim Berg, she's like, wow, that's amazing. How did you do that? You know, and I trained with her, and I love her, and I when she was still living, I teased her a lot about this. But it's not just that, you know, you have a different style, and you might just go, well, I find it really interesting that you're able to do this. Can you tell me more about it, right? So it's not about being positive. And if somebody's, you know, acutely suicidal, you know, and they become a bit less acutely suicidal, then that's a difference worth talking about. But it's not like, oh, let's do cartwheels and break out the champagne, right? It's not like. So it's possible to be too positive It's not about being positive. It's about listening carefully to what they're doing already that's working, nudging them a little bit, getting them to describe it. Not moving too fast to, okay, so what do you need to do, right? Let's make a plan. Don't move to that too fast. So, I mean, that's a long answer to a short question, but it's about using your interviewing skills appropriately. It's not about a particular model being dismissive or too positive or something like that.
Thank you, Jeff. We've reached the end of our presentation now. I want to thank you, Jeff, for your wonderful slides and your thoroughness with which you address this topic. It really is a topic that I think I agree with Karen. Teachers need to know about this, and any mental health professional working in school needs to know about this. I'm going to follow up with you to talk about how we can maybe advance the agenda with this topic, because it's so very, very important.
Yeah.
So everybody, applause. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Take care.
Bye now.